thought I showed up to that office to beg. I could see it in the way my stepfather leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that slow smile spreading across his face like he'd already won. My mother sat next to him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she didn't actually need. My stepbrother was checking his phone. None of them looked at me. Not once. That was fine. I was used to being invisible to them. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my grandmother had spent the last 4 years making sure this moment would go exactly the way she intended. I'm going to back up, because you need to understand where I started before you can understand where I ended up. My grandmother raised me from the time I was 7 years old. My mother had married my stepfather when I was 6, and within a year it became clear that he wanted a wife, not a package deal. He had his own son from a previous marriage, my stepbrother who was 9 at the time, and that was the family he'd signed up for. Not me. My mother made her choice. I don't think she even took a full day to think about it. She called my grandmother on the Tuesday afternoon and asked if I could stay for a while. My grandmother drove 40 minutes to pick me up. She had my favorite blanket waiting in the back seat, the yellow one with the little ducks on it that I'd had since I was a baby. And she didn't say a word about my mother the entire drive home. She just reached back at a red light and squeezed my hand. I lived with her from that Tuesday until I left for college. Those 12 years were the best of my life. My grandmother's name was Loretta, but everyone in town called her Miss Lou. She was 71 when she took me in and had the energy of a woman half her age. She woke up at 5 every morning, tended her garden, made coffee strong enough to strip paint, and had opinions about everything from local politics to the best way to make cornbread. She taught me to drive in an empty parking lot on a Saturday morning, hands over mine on the steering wheel, patient as a saint. She came to every single school event I ever had. Every single one. She sat in the front row at my high school graduation with a handmade poster that said, "That's my girl," in glitter letters that she'd stayed up until midnight making. My mother did not come to my graduation. My stepfather certainly didn't. What they did do, consistently, for 12 years, was remind me that I was an inconvenience. Holidays were the worst. My grandmother always invited them, always tried, always set an extra place at the table. My stepfather would find a reason not to come. My mother would come alone sometimes, sit awkwardly for an hour, then leave early. My stepbrother, who I'll call what he was, which was a stranger to me, never came at all. Every Christmas, my grandmother would have a gift for him anyway, wrapped and sitting under the tree just in case. He never showed up. She never stopped buying the gift. That tells you everything you need to know about who she was. My grandmother owned a lot of things that no one in my family had paid much attention to over the years. She'd inherited land from her own parents, about 200 acres outside of town, and over the decades she'd been careful with money in ways that people from her generation knew how to be. She didn't drive a fancy car, she clipped coupons. She wore the same winter coat for 15 years, but she also had a financial advisor she'd been meeting with quarterly since 1987, and she understood compound interest the way other people understood the weather. By the time I was in my late 20s, my grandmother's estate was worth approximately $4.1 million. That included the land, the house she'd lived in for 50 years, investment accounts, and a small commercial property in town that she rented to a local business. My mother and her husband didn't know the full number. They knew she had money. Everyone in the family knew that, but they'd always assumed it was modest. Retirement savings. Maybe enough to leave something to a few people. They were wrong. I found out the real number 2 years before my grandmother passed, because she sat me down at her kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, poured us both a cup of coffee, and told me herself. "I want you to know it's coming," she said, "so you're not blindsided, and so you can prepare yourself for how other people are going to act." I didn't fully understand what she meant by that last part until later. She'd been working with her attorney for years on her estate plan. Everything was structured carefully, a revocable living trust that had been set up over a decade prior, updated regularly and designed specifically to avoid probate and minimize the ability of anyone to contest it successfully. Her attorney, a quiet man named Mr. Hargrove, who had offices downtown, had been advising her on exactly this kind of planning for 30 years. He knew what he was doing. More importantly, she knew what she was doing. She left me everything. Not most of it, everything. She told me why too, sitting at that kitchen table with her coffee going cold. She said my mother had made choices that had consequences, and she wasn't going to reward those choices at my expense. She said she'd watched me build my life from scratch, working 2 jobs through college, graduating without debt because of a combination of scholarships and sheer stubbornness, building a career in accounting that I was genuinely good at. And she was proud of me in a way that words couldn't cover. She said she wasn't leaving me money to make my life easier. She was leaving me what she built because she trusted me with it. "You're not getting this because you're my granddaughter," she said. "You're getting this because you're the only one who ever treated this family like it was worth something." I cried. She handed me a paper towel. She never kept boxes of tissues, said they were a waste of money, and told me to pull myself together because she wasn't dead yet, and she still needed me to help her repot the tomatoes. That was my grandmother. She passed away 18 months later, in March, at her own home in her own bed, the way she'd always said she wanted to go. She was 83 years old. I was with her. I held her hand. I called my mother that night to tell her. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. My mother said she'd need some time to process everything. She did not ask how I was doing. The notification about the estate went out through Mr. Hargrove's office the following week. That's when things changed. My mother called me 3 times in one day. My stepfather left a voicemail. His first voicemail to me in years, friendly and warm in a way that made my skin crawl, saying he hoped we could connect soon and that family is so important at a time like this. My stepbrother, who had exchanged exactly 0 words with me in the past decade, sent me a text message that just said, I didn't respond to any of them. The formal reading of the trust documents was scheduled for a Thursday morning at Mr. Hargrove's office. I arrived early. I sat in a chair near the window and watched the parking lot. My mother and stepfather pulled in together, and she was dressed like she was going to church. Nice dress, good jewelry, and he was in a blazer. My stepbrother came separately, still looking at his phone before he even got out of the car. They came in, and my mother hugged me, which was the first time she'd hugged me in probably 3 years. It lasted about 1 second and felt like being touched by someone wearing a costume of a person. We all sat down. Mr. Hargrove went through the documents methodically. The trust was clear. The language was airtight. My grandmother had left her entire estate to me, designated as her primary beneficiary, with no co-beneficiaries, no conditions, no ambiguity. There was a small specific bequest to her church, and a modest amount to a neighbor who had brought her groceries during the pandemic. Everything else came to me. My stepfather's expression shifted the moment Mr. Hargrove finished the summary. The friendly. I thought a lot about what my grandmother actually gave me. Not the land or the accounts. I mean, the thing underneath all of that. The thing I keep coming back to at 2 a.m. when I'm lying awake in the quiet. She gave me proof that the way you live your life accumulates. Every choice you make, how you treat people, whether you show up, whether you do what you said you'd do, it doesn't disappear. It lands somewhere. It becomes a record. My grandmother understood this in her bones in a way that took me years to begin to understand myself. My mother and stepfather spent decades making choices that felt costless to them, leaving a 7-year-old with her grandmother, not coming to graduations, calling after years of silence only when there was something to gain. Each of those choices probably felt small in the moment, justifiable, forgettable. But they weren't forgettable. They were building something, just not what they intended. And my grandmother spent those same decades doing the opposite, waking up at 5 a.m, tending the garden, driving 40 minutes to pick up a little girl who needed someone, making the poster with the glitter letters, buying the gift for the stepbrother who never came, year after year, because that's who she was, not because she expected anything back. She wasn't performing goodness. She was just good. That's a different thing entirely, and I think most people know the difference even when they can't name it. What I learned from watching her, and from living through everything that happened after she died, is that character isn't what you claim about yourself. It's the pattern of what you actually do when it costs you something. My grandmother could have taken the easier path at every turn. She didn't. She made the harder choice, quietly, without announcing it for decades. And that discipline, that refusal to cut corners on what she believed was right, is what made her decisions unassailable in the end. Nobody could argue with her letters because there was nothing to argue with. She'd been consistent. The record spoke for itself. I think about that when I'm tempted to let something slide, when it seems easier to not show up, to not say the hard thing, to take the path that costs less right now. I think about what my grandmother built over 50 years of small, unglamorous choices, and I think about what my mother and stepfather built over the same period. And the difference between those two outcomes is not luck. It's not connections or money or circumstance. It's just the daily, unsexy work of being the kind of person you actually want to be. I'm still figuring out who that is for me. I'm still deciding what to do with her house. I'm still working through whether I'll ever call my mother back and what I would even say. These things don't resolve cleanly. Real life doesn't. But I know this. I want to be someone my grandmother would recognize. Someone who shows up. Someone who does the work. Someone who, if it ever came down to it, could hand a lawyer a stack of letters and let them speak for themselves. That's enough to aim for. For now, that's enough.